Hi, my name is Benedict. I wanted to walk you through how I made the guitars for the Run from the Sun album. If you haven't listened to the album already, it is an electronic metal album. By electronic, I mean that it's made purely using electronics. Metal as in it uses metal compositional techniques. It sounds silly to be so pedantic or define those terms in that way, but I do notice that a lot of modern metal and modern electronic acts focus more on certain details rather than the spirit or the soul of the thing. Metal to me is very much the soul, the style, the feel of that style, and not just saying here we've used lots of really overamped guitars, therefore we're metal. There is some stuff happening in electronic metal where they're merely just using synthesizers and overdriving them and saying, oh, we're electronic metal. When I was a lot younger, or in the early 90s, that was just kind of called hardcore. It was a form of house or techno or rave that was just really extreme. Acts like Ultraviolence were doing it, and it's amusing, but it sure isn't metal. Not in the way that any metal lover would love it. I've tried to write using the electronics that I normally use. I've tried to write with the soul of metal. So by metal I mean Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, that sort of thing. Only coming at it from being a synthesist. Now it's quite common that there are plenty of guys who are making what they're calling metal, and some of it sounds pretty darn good, with guitar emulators. So they're a whole pile of guitar samples and various scripts that make it appear like a guitar, and the demos sound great, and obviously if you know what you're doing, probably if you know how to play guitar, you can make them sound pretty good. If you don't, I think it kind of defeats the purpose. They don't sound that great. I played with them, wasn't bowled over from my own perspective. And what I wanted to do was what I always do is basically recreate my world using my own type of sounds. So that meant going back to pure synthesis, looking at the amps, looking at the guitar to work out, well, how are these things achieved? And to turn around and try and make my own version of that. So we'll probably start by playing you some section from one of the tracks. This is Neptune, the Blue Dreamer. And this runs you through how the guitars and everything come to work in a piece. So there you have it. That's what one of my pieces sounds like. You're hearing fairly standard for metal twin axe attack. So you're hearing one guitar on one side, another guitar on the other side. I've kept this music sort of fairly simple. Part of the style that I've copied is Doom. Real classic Doom is prone to using an almost medieval technique of being monophonic, so it doesn't mean necessarily that all the instruments only play one note, but just that all the movements of all the instruments is the same. So in polyphonic music you'll have notes that go up and down and move around each other. In pre-polyphonic music, medieval music, you'll find that all the instruments go up, all the instruments go down, they all follow each other. So even though you may have several separate voices, they all track exactly the same. So they don't create a polyphony or a sense of harmony. So that's something that's unique to Doom and I rather like. So you'll hear elements of that through there. So guitar sound. This sound that I made here isn't actually from the album at all. It's just something that I made to show you the style of it. So we'll start with the basic sound. For a lot of the sounds I did end up using Europa from Reason 10. I have used Thor and various other instruments, but Europa was probably the most common synth that I would choose, in great part because the wavetable engine allows you to change the shape as you go, which makes the instrument more interesting. So the basic synth sound itself doesn't sound very dramatic on its own, really doesn't, but if you think about it, a guitar sound on its own, a single string, probably isn't the most exciting. It's not the most complex sound, but it's what you do with it after that makes it really, really interesting and complex to deal with. So basic sound, you'll note that I haven't gone down the road of guitar amplifier emulators. It's not that I've necessarily got anything against them, I just ended up preferring the sound that I made my own way. Scream I think is great, so we're adding one layer of overdrive here and then a second layer here. Doesn't sound that wonderful. Something that guitars do in the core of a piece will be to play power chords, so we're emulating the power chord up here through using note echo. So I play one note, it plays power chord, so first the 7 semitones up and an octave above, so it's power chord, you can see that there, C, G, C. If we get really at the top note, top note does make it a lot more dramatic. I've constrained to a scale in this instance, that's what I'm using chords for. We're sort of getting somewhere. Something that is very much what your amplifier cabinet does is it creates resonances, so it creates peaks in some parts of the sound and chops out other parts of the sound. So a guitar speaker really, really messes up the sound that you start with, but it's a sound that we actually like more often than not. So added in a resonator here. It's relatively subtle. Also added in reverb. Quite a lot. You can change boosts and cuts, EQs. Is how we also notice that I'm using aftertouch here. We could use the mod wheel, but I'm using that for another purpose. So that's bending. So you'll see guitarists bend the strings up as they play and bend up, which is doesn't necessarily sound too great on its own, but what I did through the album was that I'd record or sequence the guitar parts I then tend to go back with a second pass actually recording mod wheel. So a bit of movement. Yes, if you're a guitarist and you listen really closely, you'll probably go, oh geez, that doesn't sound like a real guitar at all, and that's fine, it's not a problem. But by creating that movement, you create a sense of sort of more real. It definitely pulls the ear around, which makes it sound interesting. There are, of course, a ton of ways that you can do this and end up with different sounds, and that's part of what I liked about this. I didn't want to end up having essentially the same guitar on every single track. Just kind of not my way. A big important thing in music and metal is your palm muting. So that's where on your playing hand, your pick hand, you'll tend to use the fat part of your hand here, lightly up against the strings, and so that stops them from vibrating. So rather than vibrating freely, you're creating a mute, so you're stopping them, so you're really important part of the metal sound. And so that's largely so judicious use of the filter here. You'll see that with the filter envelope it doesn't open instantly, nor does our amplifier envelope open instantly. If they do, you tend to end up with a very synthy sound. So think about it, when a guitar's played, it is actually strummed. Even though in metal it's really fast, there's still a sense of time that passes from the beginning to the end of that thing. And if you take away that time, you're plucking two strings at the same time. It just doesn't happen when a guitarist is playing, whether it's Van Halen or Malmsteen or whoever. It doesn't happen that way. So adding a little bit of time onto the attack works really well with the drive units, and in that it grabs that so that your tone changes over time, and that makes it sound far more interesting. It's all very quick and you don't really hear it, but it just gives you that meatier thunk on the end, on the start of the note, rather than just being on. In this case, creating the chugs is basically done that way by changing more of the filter or how quickly that closes down than much else. Hope that gives you a sense of how I did that, and if you're interested in creating your own sounds along those lines, gives you an idea of how or why you might choose to do it that way. Thank you.